We want to go back now to the return of free journalist Olivier Dubois. You can see some live images here we're watching right now as he's being reunited with family members. You can see President Macron is right there. Obviously a very emotional time for him. He's arriving at an airbase on the outskirts of Paris. We can bring in here our Rob Parsons, our chief foreign editor. You know, Rob, Dubois spent more than 700 days in captivity. All of a sudden, he's here back with his family, with the French president. This must be quite surreal for him.
Oh, absolutely. Since it doesn't seem as though he had much inkling that his release was about to happen. Everything took place extremely quickly. So to suddenly find himself being released in Niamey, in the Niger capital, before the press, talking to the Niger leadership, and then suddenly, just a few hours after that, he's back in France together with his family again. Emotionally, it must be utterly overwhelming for him.
What do we know about the negotiations that led to his release? Also, we should mention an American, Jeffrey Woodkey, was also released in Niger. Do we know very much at this point?
We don't. We know that because the Americans and the French have thanked them. We know that the government of Niger played a critical role. We know, for instance, that Antony Blinken was in Niger, the first visit ever by a US Secretary of State to Niger just a few days before this release happened, and that the United States promised $150 million in humanitarian assistance to the countries of the Sahel. Whether or not there's any connection between that and the release, we don't know. We know that John Kirby, the US White House spokesperson, said that no ransom was paid. But on the details of the actual release, we don't know very much.
Okay, we want to bring in Catherine Norris Trent, who's there at the airbase where this is all unfolding. Catherine, what can you tell us about the scene there? What's the mood? We're watching these pictures. It must be an emotional scene.
Yeah, an emotional homecoming. There was a big smile on the face of French journalist Olivier Dubois as he stepped down the staircase of this French airplane, which just landed on the tarmac at Villers-Coublay, just behind me. And he stepped off in a brisk walk and was greeted by two members of his family, his father and his half-sister, and French President Emmanuel Macron, who came onto the tarmac at the foot of the airplane to meet him. And all smiles, he then headed off into a nearby hangar to be reunited with his wife and children, who wanted to be kept a little bit further away from the action, to keep these very, no doubt, emotional scenes private. It's been nearly 2 years since Olivier Dubois was taken hostage in Gao in northern Mali, and there's been very little news of him since, so a great deal of worry for them, as we can imagine. And then very quickly the news came that he was being released on Monday, yesterday. Then he was in the Nigerian capital, Niamey, and today flown back to France, where he has just touched down on French soil. All smiles and looking in rather good health, although, of course, he will be examined more closely now.
Yes, so what happens next, Catherine? I imagine there will be some debriefing with government officials about what his experience was over these last 700-plus days.
Absolutely. He will be debriefed thoroughly, we can imagine, as well as getting some rest. French authorities have been trying to battle against jihadist groups in the Sahel, in northern Mali, and along that whole stretch of land there in Africa, just below the Sahara, for more than a decade now. Back in 2012, France, or 2013, France launched the officially Operation Barkhane, sending troops in there to try and keep jihadist groups from descending further south towards the Malian capital, Bamako. They've had limited success, it has to be admitted, in controlling them. Those groups are still at large in those vast areas of deserts in the Sahel. And now the Malian authorities, who came to power in a coup d'etat, asked France to leave. So they have very little on the ground information. They have intelligence, of course, but speaking to former hostages such as Olivier Dubois, there have been several hostages over the past years, that will give them some more insights, they're hoping, into what is going on the ground. They're relying on such information and local players to really keep them up to date now that their presence, certainly in northern Mali, is no longer welcome.